all of us are born into a world of suffering. What a sad reality, no? What an antithesis to how our dopamine-induced society pressures us to be happy. Suffering is a fact of life. Different belief systems affirm this. In Buddhism, this is considered as the first noble truth. In Christianity, suffering is redemptive, giving up something or enduring loss as ways to attain serenity. Philosophers view suffering as a way to add a deeper meaning in life, says Viktor Frankl, or as a starting point to practice empathy from the perspective of Edith Stein, or as an act of being in solidarity with the oppressed. Navigating through suffering is indeed a characteristic of our shared humanity. But the interesting fact is, by recognizing the reality of suffering, by confronting it head-on, then we can find a way to get out of it. The concept of suffering is not alien to me. Let me narrate a few episodes. It was summer of 1989. I was 9 years old back then. I was walking along the sunny streets of the neighborhood when I noticed a shadow of an eagle right in front of me. And as it seemed to keep following me, I thought to myself, have I become a visionary and I can see magical things? I went home and the eagle's shadow was still there from day to night. And I started feeling strange. So, like every other 9-year-old child, I told my parents about it. And the following day, I found myself in the hospital's ophthalmology department, surrounded by worry tones. Days have passed and no doctor could give a clear diagnosis. Finally, they told my parents, Coates disease, a rare eye condition that affects kids. It was 1989. The treatment was not well developed, that even doctors had varying opinions on what treatment should be done. In addition, we didn't have the money to pursue whatever treatment. Long story short, I permanently lost eyesight in my left eye. I had to live the next 30+ years of my life seeing the world with a single eye. And this was not easy. I had to suffer the constant fear of losing my entire eyesight, that every time I would visit my eye doctors for my periodic checkups, they would tell me that I look so anxious. I had to suffer from limited mobility because my peripheral vision was compromised, being extra careful when I walk to avoid bumping into others, or not being able to drive, or having to sit at the leftmost end of a theater or a classroom just to have a good view. And there's this constant experience of having eye strains whenever I read. Finding a job was likewise difficult because physical appearance matters a lot. So I had to go through some reconstructive surgeries so that at least I would look okay. Buddhist teaching would say, there is an end to suffering. My personal view of this is by detaching my mind from thoughts of what could have happened. I had to accept reality, which is easier said than done. I had to change the narrative of suffering by unearthing the meaning behind this particular life event. By accepting such reality, by embracing an identity of being a person living with monocular blindness, I have learned to be humble. My experience of loss helped me cultivate a sense of compassion, thinking that there are fellow human beings who are going through their share of suffering and navigating ways to obtain freedom. We all have different identities. In my case, one identity that I cherish is being a genderqueer person. I grew up at a time when assigned male folks who love the color pink, who fantasized about being a beauty queen or a fairy, who glided along the streets as if they are continuous runways, were frowned upon. I grew up at a time when the typical images of the bakla are the comic characters who are whacked on the head or laughed at for expressing their gender. Being gender diverse was highly stigmatized. I was told that I cannot hold a leadership role because I am bakla. And countless times have I heard parents telling their kids not to go near me nor associate with me, otherwise baka mahawa ang kanilang anak or their children might get infected. As a queer person, I have to exist in a world that values the binary and disciplines everyone to fit in. My interests, hobbies, or choices of colors would not fit into society's prescribed gender expressions. Living as a queer person perhaps can be a good example of illustrating suffering. Let me point this out. As a queer person, I do not suffer because of who I am or who I choose to be. I suffer because my identity does not fit squarely within the binary categories that society has constructed. In my earlier narrative, my learning was acceptance. I had to accept my suffering. I cannot bring back my left eyesight. But in this narrative, I realized that changing the context that induces my own suffering is vital. My suffering is not because of who I am, but as a result of structural and systemic inequalities that breed homophobia, transphobia, and heteronormativity. It is a suffering that is caused by religious institutions deeply ingrained in our local cultures, amplified by schools, and condoned by governments. There is an end to this suffering by taking the right actions, foremost of which is to reclaim my inherent human dignity that social institutions continue to take away. The suffering I have confronted as a queer person helped shape my identity as a human rights activist. This suffering has helped me find my mission in life, which is to be part of a bigger social movement working towards social justice, non-discrimination, and equality. In fact, I have done human rights work for the past 20 plus years. As an activist, human rights education is one of my passions. You know, the learning process you undergo with students or participants forms connections and friendships and resurfaces one's self-agency. As an activist, small victories do matter. They make one happy. When you hear news about LGBTIQ students being able to go back to classes after challenging their school's strict anti-transgender uniform and haircut policies, or someone you've helped escape from persecution was finally resettled in a safer place, or after months of lobbying governments, you witness the adoption of a UN resolution that affirms the rights of LGBTIQ persons. Throughout these years, I have been fortunate to have been entrusted with leadership roles in different human rights, including LGBTIQ rights organizations. I have been part of global discussions with fellow LGBTIQ activists to help shape strategies to sustain LGBTIQ movements worldwide. We developed recommendations such as strengthening cross-movement organizing, weaving cross-border solidarity, or coordinating emergency responses for LGBTIQ activists at risk. But human rights advocacy can also be a test of character, of patience, and of endurance too. There are bigger forces, military regimes, political elites, and conservative anti-LGBTIQ forces that continue to push back all of our work to advance human rights. And oftentimes I thought, maybe what I have done was not enough. Maybe the strategies we employed are no longer effective. Maybe the world needs now our superheroes, and sadly I'm not one of them. In those moments of suffering, flooded with thoughts of self-doubt and bouts of burnout, I went through another process of self-reflection. I asked myself, I know I am not a superhero, but what else can I do? In my quest for answers, I recall one conversation where fellow queer leaders tried to make sense of our activism. In that meeting, someone said that perhaps it is time for us to hold space for each other. Hold space. What does that mean? You know, I'm used to creating spaces. I've conducted countless trainings to empower activists. I have organized several meetings so that activists and government officials can dialogue with each other. I'm used to taking up spaces, spoke in different conferences in order to raise awareness about our issues and to hold governments accountable. For me, holding space seemed to be a passive act. It appeared to be as a fluffy term for not doing anything. But what exactly is holding space? A book titled The Art of Holding Space, A Practice of Love, Liberation, and Leadership, which was written by Heather Plett, offers a good definition. According to the author, holding space means walking alongside a person or group on a journey without making them feel inadequate, without trying to fix them, without trying to impact the outcome. Holding space is a practice of empathy and compassion. We listen to and seek to understand the experiences of other people's suffering. And when asked to, we provide unconditional support. We bear witness to the existence and experiences of someone who is going through suffering and assuring them that their lives matter. When holding space, we humble ourselves and decenter our power in controlling the process. We acknowledge that the person to whom we hold space for is the superhero of his, her, or their own life. Reflecting on this concept called holding space made me remember those people who journeyed with me, offered their quiet strength while I tried to make sense of my life's experiences. When I reflected on the theme, Undaunted Eminence, I immediately thought of superheroes, larger-than-life figures who made a significant impact in the world. But beyond those superheroes, let us recognize the countless unknown faces who stood alongside the superheroes, those who did hold space for them. Eminence is about having the superpower to transcend despair. It is something that can be achieved by going through one's own suffering, overcoming it, and using one's own experience of suffering as an inspiration to be compassionate towards others. Am I sounding like a martyr? Well, it indeed takes courage to become a martyr after all. All of us go through difficult times, be it academic problems, financial woes, or health concerns. I hear you and I feel you. Be patient, be strong, have courage to embrace suffering, and as you navigate through life's turbulence, may you discover and unleash your own superpower.